Okay. So I think, Chris, unless you have any opening comments, I would just get going on the agenda and move into item number 3.1 with Dr. Webster.
No, Mr. Chairman, I don't. Let's launch right into it.
Great. Thank you very much, Chair, Co-Chair. We'll pass to Dr. Webster, and he's going to, as indicated, present paper 03 and presentation 03 as per the website. And so we'll pass to Dr. Webster.
Thank you. Do the usual test. Can you hear me clearly? No. Can I be heard? Thank you. Last time there was some issues with me being a little quiet, but I'll try to speak clearly. Okay, so this is a review, as noted, of the presentation that was given at the interim meeting on the rationalization of the FIS. So we're going to try to move through most of these slides fairly quickly because you've seen them before. So as you know, the FIS is our most important source of data on Pacific halibut, provides the information for estimating weight and numbers per unit effort indices, which we use for stock trends, stock distribution, and as input for the stock assessment, and provides biological data for use in the stock assessment. A standardized FIS has been conducted each year since 1993, standardized for bait and gear. In the early period, the coverage was limited, and generally restricted to what we're now calling the core areas of the stock, 2B through 3B. The modern design on the 10 nautical mile grid began in 1998, and by 2001, annual coverage occurred in all IPHC regulatory areas, with some restrictions on the depths that were covered. The survey only took place in depths of 20 to 275 fathoms in the Gulf of Alaska and Aleutian Islands, and from 75 to 275 fathoms along the Bering Sea shelf edge. By 2010, data from other sources showed that not all Pacific halibut habitat was covered by the FIS. One of the first sources of data that I looked at that told us we were missing something was the commercial catches. And this figure here shows commercial catch as a proportion of the commercial catch that was caught deeper than 275 fathoms by regulatory area and year up to, I think, 2012. Particularly in the West, in regulatory areas 4A and 4B and 4D, or the shelf edge of 4CDE now, we had quite high rates of catch outside of the depth range of the setline survey, and those were actually increasing with time. So this was one of the alarm bells that went off that told us we needed to do something to sample what could be a significant proportion of the stock, at least in some regulatory areas. And similar figures we created at the time for shallow waters, showing we were missing some halibut habitat in shallow waters as well. As well as this, we noted that there were coverage gaps, even within the standard depth range in all regulatory areas. And indeed, this shows the pre-2011 design. 2011 is when we first did a pilot expansion of the FIS. And the stations sampled prior to 2011 on the 10 nautical mile grid are in orange, and the unsampled stations, those that have been since added to the grid, are in purple. And you can see in most areas there are some large gaps. In regulatory area 2A, we had no fishing on the inside waters. Likewise for 2B. 2B has gaps off, let me get my pointer. 2B had a gap in shallow waters off the east coast of Haida Gwaii. We had no stations in California. Some missing gaps throughout 2C through 3B, but smaller than other areas. Large gaps in 4A and 4B in particular, and a large unsampled area in the far north of the 4CD edge. The unsampled habitat meant that there was potential for bias in estimates derived from the FIS. This led the Secretariat to propose expanding FIS coverage to include the unsurveyed habitat. Pilot expansions were undertaken in regulatory area 2A in 2011. Deep shallow waters and other missing stations and 2013 in Northern California. The 2011 pilot demonstrated the ability of FIS gear and vessels to sample those deep and shallow waters. And in California, we had information from observer and recreational catch data that implied the need for FIS expansion south of the Oregon-California border. So, as well as the commercial data, we were also looking at other data sources to provide information on the need for exploring with the FIS beyond where we had been sampling. And so following those pilot expansions, from 2014 to 2019, we had a planned program of FIS expansions in all IPHC regulatory areas. The areas were prioritized for expansion depending on the amount of unsurveyed habitat and the potential for bias in the estimates of weight per unit effort and numbers per unit effort. For example, 4A had a relatively high proportion of unsampled habitat, as you saw in the previous slide. And a lot of that habitat was in deeper waters, and the information we had from the commercial data was that those deeper waters had significant amounts of Pacific halibut in them. So that was why we prioritized Area 4 for the first year, and we also added Area 2, further expanding into parts of California we hadn't done in 2013. 2015 was a slightly different part of the expansion in that it was a repeat of something we'd done previously in 2006 with a slightly different goal. So in 2006 we fished a set of stations at a lower density but paired with NIMS troll stations in order to calibrate the two surveys. So we could, through this calibration, we could then use troll survey data in years in which we aren't undertaking our own survey in those shallower waters which we don't fish on an annual basis in the Eastern Bering Sea. And so the purpose of 2015 was to validate that calibration that we had done in 2006. Would we get the same results for the calibration or in the second round 9 years later that we got in 2006? And essentially, the calibration was unchanged, and we now combine the data from both years when doing our calibration. 2016, we resumed the expansions in terms of habitat that hadn't been covered previously in 4CDE Edge, and that was a large expansion, adding 62% of the stations that are currently now part of that grid. 2017, we repeated 2A again, going even further into California based on data that showed presence of Pacific halibut as far south as San Francisco. And 4B, which was also undersampled prior to 2017. In 2018 and 2019, we finished with expansions in the core areas of the stock. So during the expansions, the FIS occupied for the first time 34% of the stations on the full 10 nautical mile grid that had previously been unsampled. So fully a third of what we now consider our sampling grid was unsampled prior to 2011. The result was an improved understanding of Pacific halibut density and distribution. Bias was reduced. In some of these areas, the estimates were revised upwards or downwards. For example, in 4A, the average catch rates in the areas that had not been sampled previously were higher than those that we've been sampling on an annual basis. So the inference is that the estimates had been negatively biased. In other areas, that might have been reversed. Uncertainty in estimates of weight per unit effort and NPU numbers per unit effort was reduced in most regulatory areas. We got more information from places that we had been essentially projecting to, based on estimates, based on space-time modeling. And these improvements were apparent throughout the time series. We didn't just get an improvement in precision for the year we did the sampling. We got improved precision throughout the time series. The resulting expanded grid of 1,890 stations has provided a full FIS design from which stations can be selected for sampling in each annual FIS. And this is that full grid in orange. It's a repeat of the previous slide, but with all the stations now colored in orange, and augmented with the NIMS troll grid, the full NIMS troll grid, the data for which we use for calibration purposes and for estimation of the indices in the Bering Sea. And our third source of data in the Bering Sea, is the Alaska Department of Fish and Game, which is now an annual Troll Survey and Norton Sound. In fact, in 2020, that was our only data source in the Bering Sea. So with a combination of our FIS and the NIMS troll data and the Alaska Department of Fish and Game troll data, we have comprehensive coverage of Pacific halibut in waters from 10 to 400 fathoms throughout their range in Canada and the United States of America. These data are assembled using space-time modeling, which we've been doing since 2016 to produce the weight per unit effort, numbers per unit effort estimates. And the modeling smooths the data in space and time, and it fills in gaps in survey coverage using model predictions. And it's the latter of those two things that improve greatly our ability to fill in those gaps by having the expansions undertaken. By having at least one look at those areas that we hadn't sampled previously, we're able to get much more precise estimates in those gaps, even in years in which we don't have coverage. And these methods have been reviewed by a scientific review board and published in peer-reviewed literature. So going forwards, we've devised a series of objectives and corresponding design layers to guide us in designing the FIS following the completion of the expansion. And our primary objective is science. It's sampling Pacific halibut for stock assessment and stock distribution estimation. And for this, we have minimum sampling requirements in terms of the station distribution, the station count, and the skates per station. And the designs that I presented at the interim meeting that have been reviewed and supported by the Scientific Review Board, or recommended for endorsement by the Scientific Review Board, are, and I'm about to present again, are those based around that primary objective, with an element of the secondary objective as well. The secondary objective is long-term revenue neutrality, and logistics and cost, operational feasibility, and cost revenue neutrality. And there are also tertiary objectives, minimizing our impact on the stock, if this is impact on the stock, assisting others in collecting data on a cost recovery basis, and any additions based on IPHC policy, such as ad hoc decisions made by Commission regarding the FIS design. So based on these objectives, we developed methods for evaluating the potential designs and presented proposed designs for review. The evaluation methods have been reviewed by the SRB 3 times. Design proposals were made for 2022 last year at IM 95 and AM 96. And at the last annual meeting, you adopted an enhanced version of one of the proposed designs. Following completion of the coast-wide FIS expansion efforts, 2019-2020 was the first year fully rationalized designs could be proposed. Beginning in 2020, it's expected that the design proposal and review process going forward will be as follows. Secretariat will present design proposals to the SRB for 3 subsequent years at the June meeting. We've completed this. The first review of design proposals by commissioners will occur at the September work meeting. Presentation of proposed design at the we will present proposed designs for approval at the November interim meeting. And this is a change from the presentation that was presented a few weeks ago, in that the goal had been to present for endorsement and then final approval at the annual meeting. So the proposal now for the review process is that going forward, that the designs we present at the interim meeting will be for your approval. And at the annual meeting, ad hoc modifications can be made to those designs. So still not locked in on a final design. There can be ad hoc modifications, but those are due to unforeseen issues arising. And so consultation with industry and stakeholders occurs throughout the FIS planning process. We get, I believe, feedback throughout the year, and we discuss things with the stakeholders throughout the year, but in particular, input is very valuable during finalizing design details as part of the FIS charter bid process, when stations can be added to provide for improved logistical efficiency. We also note the opportunities for stakeholder input during public meetings, such as the interim meeting and the annual meeting, and through the Research Advisory Board. And this was a slide presented at the interim meeting with one minor modification. This shows the review process, and Commissioner Davis and commissioners had recommended we add some notes to this indicating where stakeholders, explicitly where stakeholders have input, so that will be done in time. That will be done for the annual meeting presentation. But so we have the review side of things and the analysis side of things below. The only change from the interim meeting is that these two boxes have been modified to reflect that this is where we propose the IM decision on the designs be made at the interim meeting, and that at the annual meeting ad hoc adjustments are only made to the designs that have been adopted at the interim meeting.
Regarding this particular slide, just a reminder as well that at the interim meeting, as Ray has pointed out, the Commission has specifically asked the Secretariat to flesh this timeline out and to add additional detail for when stakeholder engagement would be sought and provided in the process. And one of those was specifically regarding the Research Advisory Board, and we're currently figuring out when we'll be able to insert the Research Advisory Board into this process, as well as including elements related to the end of the Fishery Independent Setline Survey season, where we undertake interviews with vessel captains and owners regarding how the season went and ideas for the coming viz season. And so as Dr. Webster has pointed out, we'll be following that recommendation from the Commission and providing a more detailed schematic for consideration and noting by all stakeholders at the annual meeting. Thanks. Go on, Ray.
Okay. So, due to budgetary constraints and the impact of COVID-19, the proposed neither the proposed nor adopted designs were implemented in 2020. And as you're aware, sampling was conducted only within the core areas. And so we, instead of using the designs that we had proposed for 2021 and 2022 last year, our proposal for 21 to 23 was to shift the designs that we had proposed back 1 year. And that design used efficient sub-area sampling in regulatory areas 2A, 4A, and 4B, and incorporates a randomized design in IPHC. Something's fallen off this. IPHC regulatory areas 2B, 2C, 3A, and 3B should be in there as well. And yep, looks like I overwrote a bullet point or accidentally deleted a bullet point. I believe I was supposed to also note, as well as randomized sampling in 3B, that we were proposing full sampling of all stations in regulatory area 4CDE on the 10 nautical mile grid. And it's likely that this design represents the maximum effort that can be deployed outside the core areas in coming years while still meeting the secondary objective of long-term revenue neutrality. And this was the proposed design for 2021, originally proposed for 2020, but unable to be implemented as noted. So this has randomized sampling from West Coast Vancouver Island in 2B, north and west through 3B, and sub-area sampling elsewhere and comprehensive sampling in 4CD. Noting that we also expect NIMS to be undertaking their troll survey in 4CD in 2021. And so this focuses our effort where the halibut actually are. The purpose of this sub-area design was to produce something that's operationally efficient, so accounting for the secondary objectives, but also maximizing efficiency in a statistical sense, and that putting most of the sampling effort where the vast majority of the fish are. And our estimates indicate that 60, 70, 80% of the fish in 4A, 4B, and 2A are in those areas that we're targeting for sampling in 2021. And our analysis also indicated that the changes in the amount of the stock, proportion of the stock in the unsampled areas in 21 2021 are relatively slow, so they don't need to be sampled every year to have an accurate and relatively unbiased picture of the stock. And in 2022, the change is simply fishing those stations in the core areas that we hadn't fished in 2021, along with a few additional stations to get the sample numbers up to the target. And by 2023, we're starting to visit some of the other sub areas that we did not fish in 2021 and 2022 outside of the core areas. So in particular, the shelf edge in 4A and the western part in 4B. Western portion of 4B and Bowers Ridge. 2A is unchanged from 2022, but our proposals would be that these areas be sampled in subsequent years based on our analysis of the frequency that they need to be sampled for data quality. We projected coefficients of variation, which is a measure of relative variability. High coefficient of variation indicates a lot of variability, a lot of uncertainty in your estimates. And based on historical estimates from our survey, to maintain the quality of data that we've had previously, our goal is to keep coefficients of variation at or below 15% per regulatory area. And so in the core areas and for CD with 100% sampling, the CVs will remain well within their limits as they did in the core areas in 2020. And randomized or full sampling designs in these areas will ensure also unbiased estimation. In other regulatory areas, we project the following CVs following completion of the 2023 FIS. And note that from 2021 onwards, by the end of 2023, all CVs will be within our target range. That is, below or equal to 15%. With the only anomalies being in 2020, due to the lack of sampling in those regulatory areas this year. And the SRB, as you're aware, recommended that you endorse these designs. So as new FIS data come in each year, we revise our understanding of the spatial distribution of Pacific halibut. There may be local contraction or expansion of the distribution or changes in interannual variability in subareas. That may lead to revisions in the future frequency of FIS sampling in each area that will be incorporated into subsequent design proposals. And the result of this, the result of that is that each year, what we've proposed each year for 3 years out, apart from the current year or the subsequent year, is not locked in. We're not immune to new information. If new information comes out that there's a greater need for sampling earlier in, say, somewhere we hadn't considered sampling in 2022, then that may lead us to change our proposal for 2022. So as we look at the data that we got in 2020 and we look at other sources of information, we will review our proposal for 2022 and 2023 and possibly modify those when we present them again in 2022 and subsequent years. So each year there's an evolution of the designs going forward. So that the idea being that the design we propose for the subsequent year is based on the best available information at the time. We propose 2 years out to give some sense of understanding of what our plans are and some sense of predictability for those planning the FIS. So the proposed designs, as already noted, do incorporate some consideration of cost by using logistically efficient sub-area sampling designs in the lower density regulatory areas. Since the FIS is funded by sales of captured fish and is intended to have long-term revenue neutrality, any design must also be evaluated in terms of expected catch of halibut, sales price, charter vessel costs, bait costs, and so on. And you're familiar now, I believe, with our, at least through presentations, of a tool that Secretariat staff have developed for undertaking that evaluation of each design. So balancing these factors may result in modifications to the design proposals. We may need to increase, for example, we may need to increase sampling effort in high-density regions and decrease low effort in low-density regions. And this is something that we've been doing since I've been working for the IPHC and before, where we modify the number of skates and more recently the number of stations in order to produce something that's closer to revenue neutrality. And so we're essentially offsetting the cost of those areas that are revenue negative, and those tend to be areas like 2A and 4B, 4CDE, with those areas that have been historically revenue positive, with more effort in those areas that have been historically revenue positive. And at present, with stocks near historic lows and prices for low prices for fish sales, the current funding model may require some low-density habitat be omitted from the design entirely, as occurred in 2020. If we want to, if the goal is, if we're considering strict revenue neutrality, for example. This will have implications for data quality, particularly if such reductions in effort relative to proposed designs occur over multiple years. And this will be the focus of the next presentation that I'll be presenting after this. Okay, so that's the quick run through the IM presentation with a few extra slides. So I don't know if we want to take questions at this point or move into the second presentation. Turn it over to the chair.
Sorry, I was having a bit of connectivity myself. Can you hear me okay, Dr. Webster? Okay. Yeah, thanks. So, Ray, you also have a second presentation as well. Do you think it's better to go through both or take questions now on the first one, which is a very good history of what's transpired over the last number of years to rationalize, if you will, the setline survey and provide us an overview of what's proposed for going forward. So would it be useful to go through your next presentation, then take questions, or would you prefer to have them now and then go on to the next one?
I'm happy to do the next presentation. It's relatively short.
Sure, let's do that.
Okay. So this presentation is somewhat in response to some discussion on the possibility of reducing the FIS again in 2021. And so we thought if that's something that is potentially under consideration, that it'd be important to look at the implications of doing that for a second year in a row. So the discussion seemed to be at the interim meeting that of the potential for possibly emitting again those low density areas, low density, high cost areas at the ends of the stock. So that's what we examined here. So here we consider the implications of emitting IPHC regulatory areas 2A, 4A, 4B, and 4CDE from the FIS in 2021. These were the areas that were also unsampled in the 2020 FIS. This will lead to increased uncertainty in estimates from unsurveyed regulatory areas. There will be potential for bias in the estimates of not only from those areas, but in overall stock trends. And the effects on stock distribution, and there'll be effects on stock distribution, harvest rates, and the stock assessment model. And there will also be impacts on future planning. And we'll look at all of those. And also, my colleague, Dr. Stewart, is available for perhaps expanding on some of these slides regarding the stock assessment as well. So, implications for uncertainty. These regulatory areas were not surveyed by the FIS in 2020. As a result, the coefficients of variation for weight per unit effort were outside of the target range of less than or equal to 15% for 3 of these areas. The estimate for regulatory area 2A was 22%, for 4A it was 25%, and for 4B it was 25% also. The CV for regulatory area 4CD, which is much larger and has been including a lot of information from the trawl survey, so it has higher sample sizes, also increased but remained within the target, at least in 2020, went from 10 to 12%. If the proposed 2021 to 23 designs are implemented, we expect CVs for all 4 areas to return within the target range, as we showed in a table in the previous presentation. However, under reduced FIS in 2021, with these areas unsurveyed for the 2nd consecutive year, uncertainty will increase further, leading to the following CVs for 2021. That's 26% for 2A, 30% for 4A, and 31% for 4B. And these are some, or if not the greatest, in the time series for each of those regulatory areas, and considerably larger than our target. So this would be providing us with much poorer estimates than the survey had been, the FIS had been producing prior to even the expansions in these areas. We can expect the CV for biological region 4 to also increase further outside the target range. So I haven't talked much about biological regions versus regulatory areas. Generally, if we focus on regulatory areas, we'll also meet the target for the biological regions, which combine multiple regulatory areas. In the accompanying report, we noted that the CV for the biological region 4 was outside its target of 10%, target range of less than or equal to 10%. And since biological region 4 is made up of 4A and 4CD, not surveying these in 2021 would lead to an expected further increase in the CV for that biological region. So graphically, this is what we would expect to happen in these 3 regulatory areas by the completion of the 2021 FIS, if the FIS does not take place in any of these regulatory areas. So here I've overlaid the estimates from the model from 2019 modeling, the last time we sampled these areas, 2020 modeling, and 2021 modeling. Get my arrow. And so up until 2019, we have estimates from all 3 series of models, and so it's all overlapping, and you can see it all pretty much lines up. After up to 2019, we have our 2020 model added to that, and there was no sampling in 2020. So we can see some slight movement, some drift in the estimate, nothing meaningful, but of greater interest is the large increase in uncertainty from 2019 to 2020. And that increase in uncertainty gets greater as we get estimates for 2021 in the absence of sampling again in these areas. So these shaded regions represent our 95% intervals about the estimate, and they get wider in the absence of sampling. I should note, also, and that's true of all 3 regulatory areas, I should note that we were also, even prior to 2020, the uncertainty was increasing in these regulatory areas. For example, in 4A, we did our expansion in 2014, which is where the narrowest intervals are here. And the uncertainty was already increasing, and by 2019 the CVs had already exceeded the 15% or less target range. I think it was something like 16% or 17%. Our proposal for concentrating sampling in the west of 4A in 2020, originally 2020, but now 2021, 22, 23, was expected to bring the CVs, by focusing our effort where most of the fish are, bring the CVs back within the target range in 4A. And likewise in 4B, where we had an expansion in 2017 and very precise estimates in 2017, as we moved away, even in years in 2018 and 2019, where we did fish in 4B, the uncertainty was still increasing. Getting to the rationalized FIS designs that we've proposed, would again bring that uncertainty back down within the target, as noted in the table in the previous presentation. Without the sampling, the uncertainty starts expanding. Even without any sampling, the uncertainty increases as time goes on. Even if we returned to the designs prior to the expansion series, the uncertainty would still be increasing, but at a slower rate. So this is meant to highlight the importance of revisiting these areas in 2021. Uncertainty is only one part of the picture. The lack of a FIS at the ends of the stock in 2021 also increases the potential for bias. We would have known information on stock trends in these three regulatory areas since 2019, and limited information on stock trends in regulatory area 4CD. We're expecting some information from the NIMS Trawl Survey in shallow waters, but the NIMS Trawl Survey does not fish the deeper waters, most of the deeper waters covered by our own FIS, which is where, historically, the greatest density of Pacific halibut has been found. So any increases or decreases in Pacific halibut density and abundance over that period in the unsurveyed habitat will be unobserved, and our estimates of weight per unit effort and numbers per unit effort indices may be biased if those increases or decreases occurred. So this has both local implications. We don't understand what's going on in these areas. We have a poor understanding of what's going on in these areas if we don't visit them, but also implications for our understanding of coast-wide stock trends and distribution. This is not a trivial component of the overall stock, as we'll note in a moment. And so it does have an impact on the overall stock estimation. Historically, it's not unusual for mean weight per unit effort for a regulatory area to change by over 20% in a single year. We see a number of instances of that occurring in, I think, almost each area over the course of the 1993 to 2020 time series. Most recently, we saw those kind of changes in 27, I believe, from 2016 to 2017 in a number of areas. If such changes have occurred in the unsurveyed areas at the ends of the stock since 2019, our estimates of overall stock trends will be biased. So there's a risk to not revisiting these areas for 2 years or more. So this is meant to illustrate the type of bias that could potentially propagate into the coast-wide trends. So I'll take a little moment to explain this figure. This shows the output of the space-time modeling up until 2020 in blue with the uncertainty around it shaded with the 95% intervals highlighting the uncertainty around those estimates. Now, what if we don't sample again in 2021? So let's assume, for the sake of this illustration, that the core areas don't have any change in overall index from 2020 to 2021. This doesn't really matter much. It either goes up or down, but what we're interested in what could happen relative to our estimates in the absence of sampling. So we assume no change. We could have assumed an upward trend. Everything else would move up in that case as well. So if we don't survey the ends of the stock in 2021 again, yet they have either a plus or minus 10% change in aggregate over all those regulatory areas, then we would estimate this blue line here, this blue point in 2021, but the true value would, for a 10% increase or decrease, would be in red, here or here. If suppose instead we had a 20% increase or decrease in those unsurveyed areas, an increase or decrease that was unobserved because we didn't sample them, then we'd still estimate this blue point here, but the true value could be a net positive increase in the coastwide trend or a net negative change over that 2-year period. So even over a relatively short term, our understanding of the coastwide stock trends can be affected by omitting these areas at the ends of the stock. They might seem low density, but there's a relatively large, they still, in aggregate, comprise a relatively large proportion of the stock. Now I'll welcome Dr. Stewart to interject if I get anything wrong here, but he can help fill in any gaps in my explanation. at the end of the presentation as well. So the effects on these estimates will flow through into our estimates of stock distribution. We might be underestimating or overestimating the proportion of the stock in each regulatory area, depending how much things have changed at the ends of the stock relative to the core areas that would be sampled in this scenario. That would affect our estimates of harvest rate and will feed into the stock assessment model. So the four end areas, as I noted, are not a trivial proportion of the stock. They contain almost 30% of the Pacific halibut stock based on our latest estimates in 2020. So almost a third of the stock are in these areas that weren't sampled this year. The stock and fishery are currently in transition between a strong 2005 year class and more recent 2011 and 2012 year classes. The 2-year sampling gap in these areas, particularly in the West and regulatory and biological region 4, will increase the likelihood that the stock distribution and therefore the realized harvest rates may differ appreciably from those intended by the IPHC's interim management procedure. So with reduced precision, the ability of the stock assessment model to update currently predicted trends based on new information is much more limited. The model relies heavily on the trend information provided by the annual FIS, and as we saw in a couple of slides ago, that trend information can be biased if there is bias in that 30% of the stock that may be unsurveyed. So actual increases or decreases in the overall stock trend may not be tracked, therefore, by the assessment model in this case. And there are impacts on the planning of the FIS in the future as well. A second consecutive year of reduced FIS in 2021 will have implications for the designs that we propose in 2022 to 2024. We will have to revise the designs that we've proposed at the interim meeting and that you just saw again in the last presentation. Because of, as you saw in those figures, the uncertainty starts increasing rapidly as you move away from the last time you surveyed an area. There will be need to catch up. And so we would have to increase, we'd likely have to increase the amount of sampling we do in these areas in 2022 and onwards in order to get back within the targets, our data quality targets, due to the loss of information in 2020 and 2021. And the longer the gaps, large gaps in sampling coverage persist, the more difficult it is for estimation quality to recover. You saw the table in the previous presentation which showed that if we get back on track and fish the design that we've proposed in 2021, 2022, 2023, then coefficients of variation will come within the target range in all three areas, 2A, 4A, and 4B, in all 3 years in which we undertake the rationalized FIS 21 to 2023. And so leaving just 2020 with slightly higher CVs than desired. But the further we go out without sampling or with greatly reduced sampling, the more likely you are to get a period of the stock in which you just have high uncertainty in what the stock trends were and what the distribution was. Thus, the IPHC Secretariat staff do not recommend reducing the FIS footprint from the minimum 2021 design presented in the previous presentation, proposed by the Secretariat and endorsed by the Scientific Review Board. Okay, that is the end of that presentation, so I will turn it over to any questions, or if Dr. Stewart has anything he wants to expand upon, or if that as well. So thank you.
Thanks very much, Dr. Webster. I see that Commissioner Yamada has joined us as well. Richard, I'm not sure exactly when you were able to join, but Dr. Webster has given us 2 presentations. The first was, I think you'd seen pretty much before, on the rationalization of the setline survey following the expansion from 2014 through 2019. And now Dr. Webster was just going through the implications if there was a reduction from the setline survey from the minimum that has been endorsed by the Scientific Review Board. Dr. Wilson, I don't see on the agenda an opportunity for public comment and questions, but I assume that That's available for public to ask questions and comments, yeah?
Right-hand side of your screen, you can see the IPHC logo and blue text saying public comment and questions sign up. We do have one question so far that's come in, but just a reminder for those listening, if you do have comments or questions, to please click on that link and add your comment or question. Chair, the next presentation is really just a guide to assist the Commission in walking through decisions. So at this point, I would suggest maybe it's an idea for commissioners to hold discussion on or seek clarification on any points, then seek public comment. That will allow stakeholders a few more moments to add their comments in and questions before we walk through that decision paper. Back to you, Chair. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Dr. Wilson. That makes good sense to me. So, commissioners, I see a couple of hands up. I'll start with Peter.
Good afternoon, Ray. Thanks for that. If you can remind me, considering the primary objective, what necessitates 100% in for C, D, and E? If you could just remind me.
We've seen over. Is there a problem? Okay. Over the last few years, over the last several years, we've seen changes in the center of biomass in this particular regulatory area, with the stock apparently moving eastward and northward in particular. And this is quite likely in response to changes in prey distribution and changes in climate. This is environmentally a very dynamic area, and we have not, in particular, we've not sampled the northern part of 4CD since 2016, while the NIMS Troll survey has shown that changes in Pacific halibut distribution has been happening quite quickly in the shallower waters. So the deeper waters, as noted, are the waters in which we typically have the highest densities. And so this is an area where we possibly have quite a lot of uncertainty and potential for bias, in that things may have changed quite a bit over the last few years without us having undertaken extensive sampling in that regulatory area. So it's kind of an area of special concern to us, that we feel the need to have high quality, high density sampling as soon as possible. Hope that answered your question.
So, yeah, randomized wouldn't give you enough information, I assume. That's you need more in depth because things are changing due to possible climate change or whichever.
Sorry. And keep hitting the wrong button. One of the issues with randomizing an area like 4CD, and why we haven't proposed randomized designs for the areas at the ends of the stock, is that the distribution tends to be patchier. And so randomization becomes a randomized design, say sampling 50% of the stations, is not as cost effective as it is in the core areas of the stock. With a lot of the, and my colleagues can probably expand on this, but a lot of the cost is getting there in the first place. So once you're there, moving from station to station, I think is a smaller proportion of the cost than it is elsewhere. So having contiguous groups of stations, as we proposed in a sub area sampling design, is more cost effective.
Excellent. Thank you.
Commissioner Alverson.
Question on a 5-page report you had that I downloaded and printed off. There's a review of the 3 options. Would it be better if I held my questions for this presentation you were just talking about and took them up then?
You could hold fire. So if you're seeking more technical background with Dr. Webster and Dr. Stewart in support, now would be the time versus process. I would just hold fire. But up to you, through the chair.
Okay, well, let me give you one of the questions and you tell me whether I should hold it. Okay, on page 4 of 5 of this report, there's the 3 options listed, and the first 2, it looks like for financial purposes, it's truncated at not using more than 4 skates per option. But in option 3, the one that is optimized, additional skates are allowed to vary to help with neutrality. The question I have is, why did you restrict yourself on the amount of skates on options 1 and 2?
Thank you, Commissioner Alverson. Through the chair, this is all to do with the minimum data requirements that we need to ensure our precision and bias estimates are met. And to speak to that technical side of things, if I may, I'll pass to Dr. Stewart.
Thank you, Dr. Wilson, and good afternoon. I can't speak to that. Historically, the Commission has always fished between 4 and 8 skates at our stations. Below 4 skates, we begin to become concerned about what we'll call end effects or anchor fish, where effectively the ends of the skate are fishing more effectively than the middle of the skate. And so while this is always occurring for any skate length, we've found through historical analyses that we can minimize that by keeping in that small window between 4 and 8 skates. So in consistency with the historical design, we've maintained our bare scientific minimum at 4 skates, noting that we can fish up to 8 and produce comparable data that we can analyze in the same way without having to make any additional ad hoc corrections.
So my question, Dr. Stewart, is why was, say, option 2 only analyzed at 4 skates? Why not at allowing additional skates in different stations? Currently, it shows a negative 1,000,006 on its operation with 4 skates. But with option 3, you've allowed different, up to 7 or 8 skates to make it neutral. Why didn't you do that for option 2? Or why didn't the staff do that for option 2? Well, I guess that's my question is, for instance, in 3A and 2C and 2B, under option 2, it looks like you held it to 4 skates. Why not more skates in those areas? Through the chair, one last question on this.
Go ahead, Bob.
Yeah, so the optimized option, and I'm looking at the chartlet, all of the little circles are yellow on mine, and so that would tell me that you're not eliminating any option or any stations in 3A, 2C, and 2B. Is that accurate? Thank you, Chair. That ends my questions for now.
All right, thanks very much, Bob. Dave, do we have, well, first off, are there any other questions remaining from commissioners? Peter, I see your hand up, but I don't know if that's from before or not. Thank you. So I don't see any other questions from commissioners. Dave, do we have any questions from the public or comment?
While that's coming up, I'm just going to read the question. There seems to be a technical glitch there. The question is from Peggy Parker, and it is regarding agenda item 3.2, implications of a reduced FIS in 2021. And the topic is the coefficient of variation rates. And so is a CV of 25% the same as saying there's a 1 in 4 chance the number is wrong or off by that amount or something else? And so I'll pass to Dr. Stewart.
Essentially means the same thing, whereas if you just have a standard deviation, then you have to interpret relative to the estimate. The intervals that we present with our estimates in the shaded regions are closer to what the questioner is getting at, where the intervals we present, there's only a 5% chance of being outside, that the true value of the estimate, the weight per unit effort or numbers per unit effort, is outside those intervals. And we could produce intervals based on a 25% chance or a 20% chance of being outside of those as well. So they do say something about the probability of having the true value be quite wrong, quite different from, the true value being quite different from the value that you've estimated. But the CV is something different.
Thank you, Dr. Webster. And that is the only question we've received to date, Chair. Sorry, I'm not sure you can hear us there, Chair. That's the only question we have. How would you like to proceed?
Yeah, sorry, Dave. I guess maybe I wasn't heard. Let's move on to the next item, 3.3.
Process. And it's really the final slide that we're asking. The complete FIS grid includes 1,890 stations as presented by Dr. Webster. And it's the intent of the Secretariat to subsample each year moving forward based on the analysis arising from the expansion study that was done between 2014 and 19. And so that is illustrated in Figure 1, which is shown on the screen, and shows the full sampling grid from the 4CD edge all the way down to Northern California. The second piece of background information is a reminder that at the 96th session of the IPHC annual meeting, which was held in February of this year, the Commission agreed that the priority of a rationalized fishery independent setline survey sampling grid is going to be based on a range of elements and layers, primary objectives and various design layers. And these were illustrated as Dr. Webster presented, primary, secondary, and tertiary layering with various objectives, from ensuring that we maintain minimum sampling requirements in terms of station count, distribution of those stations, and skates per station, through to the secondary objective, which is the long-term revenue neutrality objective. And then finally, the tertiary objective, which is all of the other components and layerings that we look to apply to the fishery independent setline survey. Third piece of background information to recap, again, as reiterated, the Scientific Review Board has recommended that the Commission endorse the final 2021 FIS design. And the reason that this is coming from the Scientific Review Board is, as you may recall, at the end of the 2019 expansion series, we presented to the Commission the initial results and suggested way forward for a redesigned fishery independent setline survey. The Commission recommended that go back through one final review process by the Scientific Review Board, and hence this recommendation. And then finally, at the interim meeting held last month, the Commission again recommended that we hold this special session specifically to determine a way forward for the 2021 Fishery Independent Setline Survey. And so what I would like to lay out is noting those first two papers presented by Dr. Webster and supported by Dr. Stewart. We would like you to walk through the following three decision points. And then, as I said, it's the last slide that we'll focus our time on. So the first decision point is the fact that we're seeking Commission endorsement of the minimum 2021 FIS design as proposed by the Secretariat, by Dr. Webster and Dr. Stewart in particular, and as recommended by the Scientific Review Board based on the primary objective of the Fishery Independent Setline Survey. And so that's that first layer, the primary objective, detailed in Table 2. That would mean that we would sample 948 stations coastwide, representing all of the yellow dots that you can see on the screen here, with the compartmentalized design for the extremities and the more densely sampled areas throughout the core area of the stock. And so in that sense, we're simply asking the Commission to endorse the minimum 2021 FIS design as proposed by the Secretariat and as recommended by the SRB. The second decision point is surrounding what we're seeking in regards to the potential endorsement of the continued need for the IPHC Secretariat to seek long-term revenue neutrality for the Fishery Independent Setline Survey. And there really is that second layer in Table 2 that was presented earlier. It's worth noting that this is already an established agreement by the Commission, most recently including AM 096. So as indicated, we are seeking endorsement of the continued need for the IPHC Secretariat to seek long-term revenue neutrality for the Fishery Independent Setline Survey. Then it really comes down to this final decision point where we're seeking recommendations on the means to target that long-term revenue neutrality for the Fishery Independent Setline Survey in 2021. And so noting that that is an objective of long-term revenue neutrality, it doesn't necessarily mean that in 2021 we need to be revenue neutral. As Commissioner Alverson has pointed out, we're proposing three potential options to seek to achieve that long-term revenue neutrality, but there are other potential ways of doing that. Option 1 in Paper 05 is to proceed with the minimum 2021 Fishery Independent Setline Survey, involving a sampling of 948 stations with 4 skates at each station, based on the principles that Dr. Stewart has just outlined. This would result in an estimated revenue loss of $1.686 million, which means that we would need to seek to recover the projected loss in future years or from other sources. And that would also involve a need to reduce our general operating budget in 2021 quite significantly. To see that option in a tabulated format, and so a reminder, this is the minimum 2021 Fishery Independent Setline Survey as recommended by the Scientific Review Board. You can see it's the 948 stations, 4 skates, representing approximately 50% of the full Fishery Independent Setline Survey grid, with an estimated total removal of 141 tonnes at an average price of what we received in 2020 of $4.46 coastwide as an average, and then there's that total expected revenue loss. Second option is to proceed with that design, but to seek contributions from the contracting parties directly to cover that potential loss. And I understand that that's not a very palatable option for either contracting party at this point in time. And this table is the same table, simply with that number being recovered from contracting parties. And then option 3, which is our preferred option, is what's been termed an optimized version of the minimum 2021 Fishery Independent Setline Survey design. And this has involved adding an additional approximately 398 stations within the areas covered by the minimum 2021 Fishery Independent Setline Survey. And where feasible, and this comes back to what Dr. Stewart was saying in terms of why aren't we adding additional skates to the extremities of the stock. And this is where it comes down to adding those skates to stations where it wouldn't mean we'd make a further loss. So there'll be revenue positive within those survey regions. In doing so, as shown in figure 3, the next slide, it's estimated revenue loss of approximately $226,000. And that's consistent with our long-term revenue neutrality objective. We don't have to be revenue neutral, and we certainly don't have to be revenue positive in every year. It can go up and down. And so this is figure 3. This is essentially what we're proposing to you today. It's a sampling of 1,346 stations coast-wide, and it's what we've termed the optimized minimum 2021 FIS design. And the extremities essentially stay the same. It just means within areas 3A, 2C, and northern 2B, we've increased the number of stations to move towards that objective of long-term revenue neutrality. To look at that in terms of revenue sensitivity for this option, you can see in the middle here we have the projected $226,651 revenue loss with that optimized design, and that represents on the left column here the price change from the 2020 average. So in this instance, that middle number of $226,000 represents the average price we received in 2020. Versus on the top of the table here, you can see the projected stock biomass levels from 2020 as projected from Stewart's stock assessment. And we are projecting a stock biomass decline of -5%. Now you can see some variation there, obviously, if the stock was not to decline by 5%, but by 0%, 10%, and then also a greater or lesser change in average price received coast-wide. It has a significant impact on the revenue or loss that could be expected from the 2021 Fishery Independent Setline Survey as a result. Also in the top left-hand corner of this table, you can see the 15% increase from 2021, which was actually the average price from 2019. So that top row represents what we would expect in revenue loss should prices return to normal. And that gives you a good indicator as well. So really the decision point for the Commission at this meeting surrounds this decision point number 3, where we're requesting that the Commission recommend that the IPHC Secretariat proceed with an optimized version of the minimum 2021 FIS design, involving adding an additional approximately 398 stations within the areas covered by the minimum 2021 FIS design, and where feasible, adding additional skates on each station. And so I'll pass back to you, Chair, but this is essentially the recommendation we would request focus on. Thank you.
Come to this decision point around the recommendation. So first off, thanks Dr. Webster for walking us back through the rationalization of the Setline Survey. There's been a lot of work done in the expansion over the 5 years by yourself and others to get us to this point. As you noted, the Scientific Review Board has endorsed and reviewed a number of times the work that's been undertaken. And most recently, I think at their meeting in September or October of this year, they endorsed the minimum design that you had for the Setline Survey for 2021. The piece that you provided us on the implications of a reduced Setline Survey in 2021 and beyond was very informative to me as well, for looking at the implications of missing out on areas and what that would mean for potential bias going forward, and and why we would prefer not to be in that situation for the implications of how it could mislead us as we make decisions around the halibut fishery going forward. I think the other part for me, Dr. Wilson, too, it was in the first presentation, paper 3, around slides 17 and 18, where there is a schematic that Dr. Webster had put together showing the annual review and analysis timeline, if you will, for the set line survey. And you, Dr. Wilson, addressed and added to that piece as well, which I think, for myself anyhow, addressed a number of the concerns or issues that I had at the interim meeting. So I think it's good to have another look at this, given that the importance of the set line survey is for making decisions going forward. And so I'm going to see if there are any questions if any of the commissioners may have on any of the options, or whether we just move to the decision point. So I'll open it up first. Are there questions from any commissioners? Commissioner Davis.
Hi there. I had maybe just a procedural question. I don't think I understand why we need decision point number 2. I was hoping for a bit of information. I mean, we have already made an agreement around that as the revenue neutrality as a consideration. Is there something warranting us reconfirming that here, or can we just focus on the other 2 points?
My suggestion is that we don't need to reconfirm it one way or the other, but I was going to even be maybe even more brief on a decision point and having a basically whether we could adopt the decision point number 3, Neil.
Mr. Chairman, I don't know if I can't tell if my hand raise button is up or not.
Yeah, it was. I was just seeing if that addressed Neil's question or not, and then I was going to move on.
Oh, I was just going to kind of agree with Neil. That overlaps with the issues that I raised at the interim meeting on contracting party contributions and that kind of thing. And I know we're not going to go down that road today. So I'm agree with Neil. We're really looking at 1 or 3, in my opinion.
Right. Thanks, Chris. Does that address it for you as well, Neil?
Their last point here, which I think you were suggesting, Paul. So I think that addresses it. Thanks.
Bob? You do have a question? I can now, yeah. Go ahead.
Okay. So that first decision point to approve the 948 minimal option that the SRB recommended, I suppose statistically I wouldn't have a problem with endorsing it, but from a business side, I can't endorse it for the commission if it's going to result in $1.6 million deficit. And then I agree with that second point that Neil brought up and that Chris spoke to. And then as for the overall design, the optimization design, I guess in listening to Dr. Ray Webster's presentation on the coefficient of variability, that really doesn't bother me too much if we have a problem in 2A or 4B. They represent a very small portion together of the total biomass. And I note that in the 4B, that's somewhere between a negative $82,000 to $102,000 survey out there. And I don't know what the lower half 2A off of Oregon costs, but going into something like this, I'd at least like to have be closer to zero, not $227,000 in the red. So that's my comments about the last decision point, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thanks, Bob. Richard, do you have questions? Yes, I can.
Yes, I can. Yeah. So my question is on the option 3. I know the option 1 was something like 300,000 pounds of removals. With this additional sampling, how much more removals are we talking about? And does that have any impact, either probably not on a resource, but on catch limits for the coastwide? I just wanted to see what the amount of removals those additional stations would amount to.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair.
It looks like it would be around another 400 odd.
Thank you. Richard, other questions? Okay. Peter?
A separate fund so that we can track it. It's a separate numbering, essentially. And as an example of how that independent setline survey ran at a loss of $1.1 million, a little bit over. In 2020, we made, I can't remember the total off the top of my head at this point. It was a couple of $100,000 positive. And so moving into 2021, if we had not been at such a loss in 2019, there would potentially be funds left over to undertake these kinds of additional sampling at a loss. And so while that's certainly possible, and we will be tracking it and we will be reporting that to you in a very detailed format moving forward, it wouldn't be possible to use carry over into 2021, primarily because there isn't any for this Fishery Independent Satellite Survey Fund. In short, it's very possible to track it, and if there is a credit that's accumulated, it could be used to offset these types of deficits moving forward. Thanks, Chair. To fund that type of experiment, or in terms of where we locate that snap gear experiment. So in short, it's not actually part of the minimum design that's been proposed, but it would go ahead. Thank
Yeah, thank you.
Sorry, Paul, no, I had the wrong button put.
The option 3, or decision point 3. Can I ask, commissioners, are you comfortable now making a decision on the recommended design for 2021? The alternative is to go through each of the decision points, but I mean, this to me seems to be the critical one that's being sought by the Secretariat from the Commission at this point. Chris, does that make sense to you?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. It does. And I've said from the beginning, I'm very differential on this to my fellow commissioners on both the U.S. and Canadian sides. From what I've seen, I support the recommendations on all 3 decision points, including the 3rd one. So that's all I need to say right now.
Okay, thanks.
Well, that's a question, Chair, but
Bob, do you have a question?
Charters, and they've told me that, I guess in the past when we made this decision, it was at the annual meeting, and they were, the ones I talked to are comfortable with that. The thing that they're uncomfortable with is by about March 31st, they have to really know whether they got the bid or not. They are, on the U.S. side, a lot of our captains and their boats are being solicited quite often, because they are good boats, good crews, to catch black cod and other things, and they're trying to put their summers together and their falls together, a business plan, and we had that COVID situation last year where we delayed a lot of action, but an annual meeting decision, and as long as they can seem to be able to have a firm commitment, whether they got the bid or not by the end of March, fits with most of the captains I've talked, or all of the captains I've talked to. I just want to put that out there. I'm uncomfortable going into this with a 227,000 deficit, and if we're 5% off one way or the other, that could slip to 400,000. And so that's why I brought up a few minutes ago this area in 4B and the southern portion off of Oregon and 2A. If we delayed those or didn't do those this year, does that drive an oak stake through the scientist? I don't know. It would save probably $150,000. I don't see the price estimate for 2A on the email we got this morning, but I just lay that out there, Mr. Chair. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks very much, Bob. Dr. Wilson, did you want to address Bob's question or comment?
That right to make those ad hoc adjustments, because you're not talking about broad scale modifications. It would be literally the potential for essentially cancelling the extremity charter regions for sampling. It's not something that we would recommend scientifically, as outlined by Dr. Webster and Dr. Stewart, given that we didn't sample them in 2020. But it's something that could be taken under consideration at the annual meeting for additional ad hoc adjustments to the design. Thank you, Chair.
And cold storages are in a favorable position right now, so that's a positive going into 2021. But I'd like to have that information before we make a final decision at the annual meeting.
All right. Any other questions? Neil, I think your hand's up.
Comments there, but maybe we've already resolved that in that perhaps we frame the recommendation as an endorsement of this with a request to the Secretariat for some follow-up to examine options that would bring this design closer to revenue neutrality, that could be reviewed at the annual meeting for us to consider any revisions to this design. That was what I was going to suggest as a way to address Bob's comments and gauge whether that makes sense to commissioners as well as the Secretariat.
some very good arguments about sampling the extremities, and we need that data. We're missing, and that's the areas that we have the most variability, and we are seeing a lot of variability in the past year. So I agree with the scientific intent there to increase the sampling on those extremities, and in their attempt to achieve closer revenue neutrality and adding more sampling in the bulk of the stock that would provide us that revenue compensation and mitigation. I agree with that philosophy and approach. So I would be in support of making a decision on, and I would be in support of decision point number 3. I really don't know how much more information we're going to get for now in the annual meeting that would change our decisions. I think we may be able to tweak this a little bit more, but I think the loss of advantage for the commission right now and not getting these bids out and to have this question and uncertainty resolved soon enough is, I think, a priority in my mind anyway. That's my comments.
Great, thanks very much for that, Richard. Chris?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I raised my hand simply because I do have to sign off in about 7 minutes and get on another call that I can't avoid, unfortunately. But to follow up on Richard's point, as I already said, I think you heard what I said. I generally support all 3 and decision point 3 as well. And so I don't know if you're going to have a vote, but in the event that you do and it happens after I have to sign off, I concur with what Richard just said. And in the event I'm not there for the vote, hopefully Bob does. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Chris. So, Dr. Wilson, Neil had a suggestion for modifying decision point 3. Does that change anything on your end?
Thank you very much, Chair. As a slightly modified version to that, as Commissioner Yamada and Commissioner Oliver have pointed out, it will help us greatly to have a little bit more certainty as we prepare for the 2021 FIS season. And so, as a compromise, our suggestion would be to retain the recommendation as it's currently written, but then to add to it at the end, and particularly what that addition would read is essentially noting that the Commission reserves the right to make ad hoc modifications to the design at the annual meeting based on any supplemental information provided. That would achieve, I think, the same outcome and allow that, or remind all that the Commission reserves that right. Thank you, Chair.
Which I think would address both what Richard and Bob were seeking, to have the opportunity to take a look at some changes, potentially, if really necessary, at the annual meeting. I guess also for the record, I'm supportive of decision point 1, but I guess reason I wasn't going there is I didn't see that it was really necessary to have a decision around that. I mean, but I'm supportive of the recommendation from the SRB around that design. But I thought for myself that this really decision point 3 is the critical one that's needed to make a decision around the setline survey so that things can get underway as far as planning goes. So I'm going to stop there. I'm in favor of adopting the recommendation for decision point 3 with the addition that Dr. Wilson stated. So, and I understand that Chris is supportive of that. So, Bob, I'll go to you and see if you are supportive. Neil?
But I think what Commissioner Albertson was asking for is for the Secretariat to bring forward information that could inform that discussion at the annual meeting, i.e. the Commission is requesting the Secretariat to provide some, maybe like some options regarding adjustments that would bring the survey closer to revenue neutrality. So that would be my suggestion in terms of a few additional pieces to tack on to the end of this recommendation. Otherwise, I'm supportive.
Yes, I would support decision point 3, especially where it's noted that we are given the opportunity to review it at the annual meeting. Thank you.
All right. So, Dave, if you could send around that modified decision point recommendation with the 2 pieces that we just spoke about that would be added. In particular, the options were revenue neutrality, and also as well that the commissioners reserve the right to make adjustments. That would be how we would see moving forward. I think before we close, it would be worthwhile if you could just outline the next steps from here.
Develop the Fishery Independent Setline Survey Manual for 2021. May come depending on the information we provide, and the decision point at AM 97, with the intention then of implementing the Fishery Independent Setline Survey within the usual time window that we operate each year. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Neil, I see your hand up. Do you have a comment or question? All right, thanks. I noted that we would talk about our next special session meeting as far as selecting a date, but I see we're pretty much out of time. Maybe the best way to do this, Dave, is rather than spend more time here on this conference is to arrange that remotely, if you will.
Do that, Chair.
Okay. Any other business, or is there any other public comments or questions before we close off this afternoon? So no more comments or questions, Dave? All right, great. Thanks very much for the presentations, and thank you to my fellow commissioners for your comments and questions, and the modification of the recommendation that was just adopted now at the special session number 9. And with that, we'll adjourn, and I guess our next meeting will be sometime in January, yet to be scheduled. All right, thanks everyone.